I'd been reading this fella, Robert Lax, whom probably some of you haven't heard of, which isn't surprising because the only time I've seen any of his poems was in this magazine called Poetry Information. It's a very good magazine, you get a hold of it. But anyway, probably some of his poems which were sort of kind of long, thin poems. And these are sort of kind of long, thin poems on the page. It's meant to be that as you're reading it down the page, it's sort of kind of narrative gradually sort of kind of builds up before you. The only thing is, when I read them, I don't use a short line as a sort of an indication of a line break or anything, you know. It's purely, so although they're long, hidden poems, they're wee short poems when I read them out, I think. I was trying in the thing to, why I was interested in this fellow's technique was to try and get, for once, a sort of kind of narrative line into these sort of kind of dramatised phonetic things that I do in this Glasgow stuff. And I'll know sort of read the sequence. It's not really meant as a whole sort of kind of sequence, or just different aspects. I was trying to get in sort of kind of more message type things almost. Well, the first one anyway is a sort of kind of every 8th or 9th poem I've found that when I've written in this sort of kind of Glasgow sound thing, it tends to be a sort of kind of reply to somebody saying you shouldn't write like that, you know, and usually sort of. Anyway, it's just a fairly sort of. It's the language of the gutter, that he said. It's the language of the gutter. All right for funny stuff or Stanley Baxter, but love and science and that, no. The language of the intellect, he said. The language of the intellect's English. Then when the door slid open, he raised his hat, gave me a farewell nod, flung out his right foot boldly and fell 8 stories down the empty lift shaft. The next one, they're individually sort of kind of untitled. They're called unrelated incidents. It was meant to be that most of them, the way they worked out, they were sort of kind of juxtaposition of 2 separate events, which were sort of kind of casually or causally related, although the people wouldn't know. And also just a sort of kind of pun on unrelated incidents, meaning you know, incidents which haven't been related before. This one is a sort of eventually in retrospect worked out. It's meant to be an existential attack on Lallans. It's meant to, well, you know, it's meant to be just the sort of kind of realisation that you know, you've got an object, you know, like a chair. You've got a word which you can tap, or else you've got a chair which you can the sound chair, or else you've got the symbols or letters chair which you can tap as well. And these are just 3 separate facts of existence. Anyway, I think probably if you still haven't worked out the difference between your eyes and your ears, gives peace, pal. If you still haven't thought of language as a sound system, if you haven't had a think about the difference between sound and object and symbol, well, my innocent wee friend, as God said to Adam, I don't care if you call it an apple or an apple, just lay it alone. The next one is meant to be a sort of kind of criticism of the way that modes of speech, you know, can work in terms of power. You know, like obviously, if you talk the way I'm talking just now, then you're not exactly so instantly ushered off to be a major in the army, sort of style. And it's just the way that, well, it's meant to be a translation into a register of Glasgow speech of what BBC accents actually say, as distinct from you know, what the news purports to say. This is a 6 o'clock news, the man said, and the reason I talk with a BBC accent is because you wouldn't want me to talk about the truth with a voice like one of you, Scruff. If I talked about the truth like one of you, Scruff, you wouldn't think it was true, just one of you, Scruff, talking. There's a right way to spell and a right way to talk it. This is me talking your right way of spelling. This is my truth. Yous don't know the truth yourselves because you can't talk right. This is a 6 o'clock news. Belt up. The other one, this one really sort of works the way I wanted it, but one of the things also I was interested in trying to get a sort of narrative line into these was trying to some extent to preserve the thickness or whatever of the register. I mean, like, like my own register, I mean, you know, like most people, you get different registers that you talk in Glasgow as a person, living in Glasgow and brought up there. And it was just in some ways almost, in a way, trying to get the record straight as to what the things like myself and a lot of people who talk like me, whatever that means, are interested in. And it was just almost, this is meant to be, if you haven't read Paul Tillich and various folk, then it'll just be Greek to you, as they sing from Patois to you. It's a sort of kind of half satirical thing about certain sort of kind of just a wee bit superficiality about some aspects of existential theology, although I like a lot of it. At the grand theological tennis match between the orthodox all-crocs and the trendy all-stars, a rammy erupted when a young, trendy bover boy told his mate, who had an all-croc scarf round his shoulders, that he was in a flagrant state of non-being for others, to which the all-croc replied, "Why don't you shut your trap and watch the game in peace?" "It's no a game," his trendy friend replied, "neither am I watching it. I am here to witness a person-to-person encounter before the umpire is meaningful symbol for the umpire above the umpire." To which the all-croc replied, "That is a load of pish." Mirabile dictu, it started pishing, and in the true spirit of Christian brotherhood, the pair sat miserably watching the empty court under a one umbrella. Finally, from these poems, I read this. It's meant to be just a sort of Alf Garnett type Glasgow right-wing character, regurgitating, you know, the cliches from the Sun and the Express and the BBC and the Mail and the Record and the Guardian, and you know, in some ways I wish in fact I'd extended it a lot more in using the cliches. You know, it's all the fault of the unions, he said, and the workers been too greedy, he added, and the commies and no enough moderates standing up and getting counted, and lame ducks getting what have you built out, and white elephants getting sailed down the river. And I mean, we've got to pull in our belts and our backs are to the wall, you've got to admit it. Then he took out his number 8 and gave a lovely wee chip up right beside the flag and tapped it down for a 3, a birdie. I read next, well, finally, this is a piece of prose I wrote a while ago called Honest. This is a thing that when I wrote it, I meant, again without putting in too sort of a high-floating a phrase, I meant it as a score for a Glasgow voice, was the way it occurred to me. And then after I read it, I went into Glasgow University magazine at the time, and I was quite pleasantly surprised that some folk that read it then, you know, understood it, liked it, or whatever. In a way, it's a sort of a problem of, I find that in writing this sort of kind of, for want of a better phrase, dramatised phonetics, you know, for people who know the register before you write it. You can do it with sort of kind of short poems or, you know, sort of kind of thin line things, because there's an element of game involved, and people, you know, they look at it and maybe they recognise a wee bit, and it's enough to entice them to carry through with it. Whereas quite simply, if you've got a whole block of phonetics like this, you know, people look at it and think, well, you know, if I want to read Finnegan's Wake, I'll go to the real Finnegan's Wake or something, you know. And it's just a matter of convention. You know, it looks a wee bit harder work. Also the fact that, let's see, when I was talking about registers earlier, I find anyway that people shift in and out of different registers when they're speaking. So, you know, to have a whole block, a heavy, thick register, whatever, it would tend in fact to be inaccurate, you know, as besides being thing, because so that's what, so anyway, without preambling too much, it's more or less just an indication that there's a Glasgow voice about on the page, you know, rather than every time you look at a certain word it's got to be pronounced a certain way. It's meant to be a sort of kind of quasi-autobiographical thing about somebody, you know, trying to talk about the first thing they remember and that sort of kind of thing. And about trying to write, and I say quasi-autobiographical, I stress quasi, I find, you know, some folk, if you put I in the page, they think it's something to do with me, in which case, going by some of my other poems, it means I've already strangled away and jeered at people in cinemas, you know, which I haven't done as yet either. Anyway, without any further ado, I can't even remember the first thing I remember. What I mean is, I remember about 400 things all at once. Trouble is to remember them all the time. I think I must be getting off my nut. I've aye thought that though. At least I always seem to be thinking, either I'm just about to go off my nut, or else I'm already off it. But I think, well, once you're off your nut, you'll not know you're off it. But I'm not so sure. I wish I was. Even just sitting down and writing, I used to think whenever I felt like writing something, that was all right. All you had to say was, well, I think I'll sit down and write something, and you just sat down and wrote it. But no. I can't even do that for 5 minutes, but I'll sit and look at the thing and think, here, somebody's wrote that before. Then I'll go, hauling all the books out my cupboard, trying to find out who it was. And whether I find out or no, it takes me that long looking for it. I can't be bothered writing anymore once I've stopped. And anyway, I tend to think, if it's one of the things that might have been written before, there's no much point in writing it again, even if nobody actually has. Is there? It's annoying. I feel I've got this big story building up inside me, and every day I'll sit down, good, here it comes, only it doesn't come at all. The thing is, it's not as if I even know what the story's going to be about, because I don't. So I think to myself, just invent somebody, write a story about a fisherman or something. The longer I think, the more I realise I can't be bothered writing about a fisherman. What would I want to write about a fisherman for? I'm not going to get into the library and say, have you any books on fishermen, just so as I can go and read up about them, then go and write another one. Who wants to read a story about fishermen anyway, apart from people that would read it so as they could go and write another one, or fishermen that read? I suppose right enough the trick might be that you can write a story about a fisherman, so long as the main thing is that the bloke isn't a fisherman, but a man that fishes. Or maybe that isn't right at all, I wouldn't know. But I do know that as soon as I looked up the map to see what might be a good name for a fishing village, and then maybe went a walk to think up a good name for a fisherman's boat, then sat and worked out what age a fisherman should be and how tall he was and what colour his oilskins were, then got him walking in his oilskins down through the village to his boat, I'd tend to think, what does he want to do that for? Can he no do something else with his time? And if I didn't think that to myself, if I just let him go, well, it's his job, away out to sea in a big storm in chapter 2, I'd tend to think, either, here, somebody's wrote that before, or can I no do something else with my time? And in fact, if I came across somebody sitting reading it after I did write it, if I had, I'd tend to think to myself, have they got nothing better to do with their time? I don't know that I'm saying what I mean, but I suppose underneath everything, the only person I want to write about is me. It's about time I wrote something about myself. But what? I thought even, well, just write down a lot of your memories. Then maybe they'll take some kind of shape, and you can use that to write a story with, or a play, or a poem, or a film script, or God only knows what, on the fly. So that's what I did. Didn't matter the order, just day after day writing down my memories. And I'd be busy writing it thinking, what an incredible life I've had, even up to now. Then I'd be thinking, they'll not believe all this happened to me. Then I looked at it and I just about threw up. There was nothing to do with me at all. And the other people I'd be writing about, the people I'd met in that, there was nothing to do with them either. It might even have been all right if you could have said it was about me and them meeting, but you couldn't even say that. It was just a lot of flaming words. Well, that's something else. You write down a word and you say to yourself, that's not the way I say it. And if you try to write it down the way you say it, you end up with a page covered in letters stuck together and wee dots above half the letters. In fact, you end up with one of the things you need to have took a course in phonetics to be able to read. But that's not the way I think, as if I took a course in phonetics. I don't mean that anybody that's done phonetics can't think right. It's not a question of right or wrong. If you write down 1 minute and write down the next, people say you're being inconsistent. If you say to somebody, where are you off to? And they say, what? And you say, where are you off to? They don't say, that's not what you said the first time. They'll probably say something like, down the road. And if you say, what? They usually say, down the road the second time. They know always. Of course, they never really say down the road or down the road at all. At least they never say it the way it's spelt. Because it isn't spelt when they say it, is it? A fine point, perhaps, or maybe it isn't, I wouldn't know. Or maybe I think it is, but also I think that if I say maybe it isn't, then you'll turn it over in your head with it thinking, who does he think he is, a linguistic philosopher? Or maybe I wouldn't bother my rump whether it's a fine point or it isn't. Maybe I just said it for effect in the first place. Because that's something that's dawned on me, that's maybe one of the things that you're not supposed to say, and there's a hell of a lot of them when you think about it, isn't there? But anyway, what's dawned on me, or maybe it's just emerging from my subconscious, is that maybe I write just to attract attention to myself. And that's a pretty horrible thought to emerge from anybody's subconscious, because the next thing that emerges is, what am I, a social inadequate? As if that isn't bad enough. The next thing that you find yourself thinking is, am I compensating for my social inadequacy by proxy, as it were? And the next thing, the fourth thing that you find yourself thinking is, if I've committed myself unwittingly to compensation by proxy, does that mean that a sense of inadequacy unwittingly has become a necessity? And the fifth and the sixth and the seventh things that you find yourself thinking are, what if my compensation by proxy is found socially inadequate? And if they's against me, I always knew it, and perhaps posterity will have better sense. The apprentice has lifted my balls and cock, said the plumber. Sorry, that comes later. I'm not saying that these 7 thoughts necessarily come in the order in which I've presented them. To some people, I'll mention their names, these thoughts never emerge from their subconscious, particularly the fifth, which, as you can imagine, the most terrible thought of the lot. Often it turns out that thoughts 6 and 7 are most popular, the thoughts 1 to 5 are largely ignored. But the more you ignore thoughts 1 to 5, the more thoughts 6 and 7 will out. Because although thought 5, what if my compensation by proxy is found socially inadequate, never emerges from your subconscious, there comes a day when, in a casual discussion about literature in general, somebody says, your stuff's a lot of rubbish. It might not even be so blunt. In fact, what usually happens is that in the foyer of a theatre or something, and in the middle of a casual conversation about literature in general, then somebody introduces you to somebody else, and the other person says, who? And although who might not sound like a literal translation of your stuff's a lot of rubbish, nonetheless, in the thoughts of a social inadequate, it's as near as damn it. So having secretly thunk thought 6, if they's against me, I always knew it, you hurry home to write something to get your ain back. And these are the symptoms. Because you're that fed up with everything you know, so you think, that writing something seems about the only thing worth doing. Then at least when you're finished, you feel a hell of a lot better, because whoever it was getting in your wick before, you can go up to and say, I don't give a damn what you think about me, because I've just wrote a poem, and that's something you haven't done. And even if you have, I'll bet you it was rotten. Of course, you don't actually say all that. You don't have to say it, even if you could be bothered. And if it's somebody that did say to you, your stuff's a lot of rubbish, there's no much point in going up to them anyway, is there? You can just look them in the eye, in your mind's eye, and think, perhaps posterity will have better sense. I'm a writer, you're only a worker, I said to the plumber. Fuck's sake, Joe, stick one in that cunt, said the apprentice. Ball and cock, said the plumber, ball and cocks, I forgot my grammar. Get it up, you, I said to the apprentice. Listen, pal, your tea'll be up in a minute, said the plumber. Couldn't he fucking write a bookie's line, you bastard and illiterate, I said to the plumber. Right, outside, said the plumber. Mon, outside. Sorry, that comes later.